Hey guys, tonight we stand at the edge of something you're not going to like. A quiet, glittering surface that looks safe, looks calm, but beneath it, an abyss. A shattering, gurgling blackness of thought that once entered does not let you climb back up the same person. You're about to drift toward the philosophical iceberg most people never see. And once you do, well, you probably won't survive this version of yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where this little tribe of night thinkers gathers from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up each morning, maybe with coffee or a blinking phone screen, convinced you are stepping into reality. A world of physical walls, familiar names, predictable routines. But let's not lie to each other. That's not reality. That's your reality, a hallucination you've collectively agreed upon with 7 billion other dreamers. Let's start with a tiny crack in the ice. Your brain doesn't process raw reality, it filters it. According to neuroscientist Donald Hoffman, your mind evolved not to perceive truth, but to detect useful illusions. You don't see things as they are, you see them as they need to be for you to survive. Your visual cortex edits out information, guesses at what's missing, and creates a seamless picture. That blue sky, that's just how your brain interprets scattered sunlight. The wall you see, mostly empty space between atoms, and yet you cling to it as real. Philosophers from Plato to Baudrillard have been screaming this same warning through the ages. Plato's cave, remember? You sit facing shadows on a wall, thinking they're the full show, but if you ever turned around, you'd see the fire, the puppeteers, and further still, the exit to the real world, if you even make it that far without clawing your own eyes out from the brightness. Modern thinkers like Jean Baudrillard took this further. He argued we now live in hyper-reality. Our reality is no longer a reflection of something real, but a simulation of simulations. Think Disneyland, think Instagram, think motivational quotes from AI-generated avatars with six-pack abs. We have replaced meaning with the appearance of meaning. You consume replicas of reality and feel deeply moved by what? The aesthetic of depth, the performance of truth. Let's not even get started on dreams. During REM sleep, your brain lights up in many of the same regions as waking consciousness. The only real difference? The logic centers go quiet. So what's stopping this moment right now from being just another hallucinated sequence? The fact that you can pinch yourself? Pain is still just an interpretation of signals, and some people do feel pain in dreams. So where does that leave us? Oh, and let me drop this one quietly. Quantum physics doesn't help you either. At the microscopic level, particles don't seem to exist in any defined state until they're observed. Don't worry, nobody truly understands what that means. Physicists debate it to this day. But it adds fuel to the eerie notion that reality may not be some fixed thing out there, but something bubbling into being through your attention. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. The ancient Egyptians believed dreams were another layer of truth, sometimes more real than waking life. They had entire temples dedicated to dream incubation, sleeping in sacred spaces to receive guidance from the gods. You might laugh at that, but is it really any stranger than assuming the reality you're in now is the definitive one? And yet, despite all this, you keep walking, eating, loving, and fearing, as if the ground beneath you is solid. Maybe because it has to be. Maybe because admitting otherwise might drive you straight into existential vertigo. But here's the kicker. Even when you know this, when you know you're watching shadows, clinging to simulations, you still play along. Why? Because reality, however fake, is useful and comfortable and gives you the illusion of control. But scholars still argue, if perception is subjective and consciousness is limited, is there any external reality that exists independent of us? Or are we just bubbles of sensation, drifting through an echo chamber of projections. Either way, you can't go back to pretending now, not fully, not without at least a flicker of suspicion that your alarm clock tomorrow is just another layer of the dream. And that flicker, it never really dies. You sit there, maybe sipping something warm, feeling in control of your evening. You chose to watch this video. You decided on your drink. You selected the soft lamp lighting over the harsh overheads. You're calling the shots, right? Nope, not even close. See, deep under the surface, beneath your conscious thoughts, your opinions, your carefully curated aesthetic is something older, stranger, more powerful. A roiling cauldron of impulses, fears, compulsions, traumas, and forgotten dreams. Welcome to the unconscious. You've heard the word tossed around. Maybe you think of it as that place where childhood memories go to nap, or where you shove the things you don't want to think about, like your fear of failure or that oddly specific crush from 2011. Sigmund Freud was one of the first to put this iceberg on the map. His famous model split the mind into the conscious tip and the massive unconscious bulk below the waterline. But it was Carl Jung who really made it poetic and terrifying. He spoke of the shadow, the part of yourself you don't want to see, the desires that disgust you, the potential you abandoned, the anger you deny, the selfishness you justify, all of it tucked away in a dark drawer marked, "Not me." And here's the kicker. It still acts. It still speaks. It still chooses. You think you don't want to call your ex at 2 a.m.? That wasn't you, consciously. That was the unconscious sneaking behind the wheel while you were brushing your teeth. The same force that makes you sabotage your own goals, pick partners that mirror your childhood wounds, or get mysteriously sleepy every time you sit down to write that novel you've been meaning to finish. Here's a mainstream psychological fact to rattle your sense of agency. Studies in neuroscience, particularly by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, found that the brain begins preparing for a movement before you consciously decide to move. You think you're making a choice, but your brain made it milliseconds earlier. And that's just physical movement. Imagine what else it's deciding for you before you even feel like it was your idea. Now wrap your head around this one. According to Jung, there's a deeper layer still, the collective unconscious. That's right, you're not just haunted by your own past. You're swimming in inherited archetypes, primal myths, shared psychic blueprints passed down through culture and blood. Why do fairy tales all sound eerily similar? Why do you fear the dark? Why do you love a hero's journey or feel drawn to a wise old mentor or a seductive trickster? Archetypes, codes, psychological gravity wells dragging your soul into patterns you didn't invent. And if you're thinking, I'm too self-aware for that, guess what? That voice in your head that says you're self-aware, it's probably another defense mechanism. Your unconscious has read your playbook, memorized your coping strategies, and still plays chess 3 moves ahead. Let's sprinkle in a quirky tidbit. Salvador Dali used to hold a spoon while napping in a chair. When he drifted into unconsciousness, the spoon would drop and wake him, giving him access to surreal half-dream states. Most of his trippy paintings, courtesy of the slippery space between conscious and unconscious. The guy literally hacked his own mental glitch for art. You may think you're above all this, that you've processed your traumas, healed your wounds, confronted your shadows. Maybe. But until you stop flinching at honest feedback, stop repeating the same toxic relationship dynamics, stop confusing being busy with being fulfilled, your unconscious is still writing the script. Scholars still argue whether the unconscious is a real place with structure or just a metaphor for the chaos beneath conscious thought. But here's what they agree on. It shapes almost everything you do. Even your dreams, those weird movies your brain plays while you sleep, are messages from below. Symbolic puzzles, a whisper from the parts of you that don't speak English but still have a lot to say. You ever suddenly hate someone for no reason? Freeze during a conversation? Feel irrational panic in a perfectly safe place? That's not you being broken. That's the unconscious pulling a fire alarm. And often, you don't even know what the emergency is. You want to be yourself? You better figure out who's in there. And I hate to break it to you, but the part that curates your social media bio isn't it. So next time you think you're being rational, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself who's actually steering, because you might be surprised to find it's not you. You walk through life thinking you're free. You've got choices, right? You picked your clothes this morning. You decided what to eat. You even chose to listen to this video instead of doom-scrolling TikTok. Free will, autonomy, control. Let's dismantle that comforting illusion. See, the idea of freedom is one of the most seductive lies ever sold. From your first breath, you're told, you are free to be whoever you want to be. But the fine print says, as long as you obey traffic laws, pay taxes, work a job, believe in progress, act normal, don't ask too many questions, and don't freak people out with too much truth. But here's the scary question. If you follow invisible rules so tightly, were you ever truly free? Let's begin with the existentialists, the ones who actually tried to answer this. Jean-Paul Sartre said you are condemned to be free. That sounds great until you realize what he meant. There's no God, no cosmic instruction manual, no pre-written destiny. Nothing outside yourself giving you purpose. So now, you must create your life from scratch. And if you mess it up, no divine scapegoat. It's all on you. You're not chained, but you're also not protected. That's the prison of freedom. And yet, despite this terrifying liberty, most people immediately run to cages. Think about it. You didn't choose your name, your language, your parents, your gender expectations. Your religion, if you had one, was likely assigned before you could walk. And even as an adult, the so-called choices you make are often driven by fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of rejection, fear of poverty, fear of being different. Scholars argue whether free will even exists in the neurological sense. Neuroscientist Sam Harris makes a compelling case that all your thoughts, feelings, and actions are determined by prior causes. Your genetics, upbringing, environment, subconscious biases. In that view, free will is like a magician's sleight of hand. You think you're making a choice, but your brain decided long before you got involved. Let's throw in a mainstream fact. In 2008, researchers using fMRI scans could predict a participant's decision 7 seconds before they consciously made it. 7. That's enough time to boil water or change your mind. But you weren't even in the room yet. You might ask, if I'm not free, why do I feel like I am? Great question. Because the illusion of control is deeply adaptive. You function better when you believe you're steering. It keeps you from collapsing into existential despair every time someone asks, what do you want to do with your life? Now here's a quirky tidbit to keep you up tonight. In some Buddhist monasteries, monks are trained to meditate for days on whether a single thought was truly their own. Spoiler alert, the answer was usually no. Even your so-called rebellion is often pre-scripted. Buying edgy clothes, quitting your job to find yourself, backpacking across Southeast Asia with a GoPro, that's not freedom. That's capitalism selling you the fantasy of freedom with a hefty markup. Even Nietzsche, the ultimate bad boy of philosophy, warned against this. He called it herd morality, the rebellion of the masses still within the limits defined by the herd. And let's talk about choice fatigue. You know that mental exhaustion you feel scrolling Netflix for 40 minutes without watching anything? That's freedom eating itself. The more choices you have, the more paralyzed you become. It's the paradox of modern life. You're drowning in liberty and somehow still can't breathe. But let's not be too bleak. There's a crack in the glass. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that even in the most horrific conditions, humans could still choose their response. His idea? You might not control your circumstances, but you can control your attitude toward them. That's the sliver of freedom that survives in the fire. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to decide what suffering means. So maybe freedom isn't about options. Maybe it's about awareness, being aware of the scripts you inherited, the cages you built yourself, the fake choices sold to you. Maybe real freedom starts when you admit, I'm not free yet, but now at least I see the bars, because the most dangerous prison is the one you don't realize you're in, and the most powerful escape, knowing it. You stare at your reflection and say, this is me. You list your likes, your quirks, your Enneagram number, your Myers-Briggs type. Maybe you throw in a few traumas for flair. But deep down, you believe there's a real you, a stable self waiting to be found, sculpted, and maybe posted about. Sorry, but who gave you that idea? The harsh truth is, you don't really know yourself, not in the way you think. Most of what you call a personality is scaffolding, built by your caregivers, your culture, your survival strategies, your need to be accepted. The self you defend so fiercely is often just a curated playlist of behaviors that once kept you safe. Let's get clinical. According to psychologist Dan McAdams, your identity is constructed through narrative. That means your self is a story, one you started telling unconsciously in childhood and continue editing to this day. And like any story, it's full of unreliable narrators, biased memories, and blacked-out chapters you'd rather not revisit. You don't really remember your childhood as it was. You remember it as it felt. You rewrite the details every time you retell it. You reshape the villains and victims to match your current worldview. One year your dad is the monster. The next, he's the misunderstood hero. Truth bends to the emotional arc. And here's the kicker. Your brain wants it that way. It needs a sense of continuity to keep you sane. So even when you change radically over time, it backdates the new you into your past self to make the whole thing look seamless. Let's toss in a quirky tidbit. In ancient Roman times, the word persona referred to the mask worn by actors. That's right, your personality was originally understood as a role. Jung took that concept and ran with it. He believed you wear a social mask, your persona, to navigate the world. But beneath that lies the shadow, which we already met, the anima animus, your inner masculine feminine energy, and the self with a capital S, a vast, mysterious psychic totality you can only ever partially glimpse. But guess what? Most people never get past the mask. You say, I'm just a shy person. But is that shyness you, or is it what kept you invisible when attention felt dangerous? You say, I'm a high achiever. But is that ambition you, or was it how you earned love when love felt conditional? Even your preferences might be protective. Your type in relationships, probably shaped by whatever emotional wound feels most familiar. That food you hate, maybe it's connected to an unconscious association from childhood. You might hate bananas not because of taste, but because they were served at the daycare where you were ignored. Want a mainstream study to twist the knife? In the famous false feedback experiment, researchers told participants they scored high on a trait they didn't actually endorse, like being introverted. After just minutes of reflection, participants began to believe it was true, and even remembered past behaviors that proved it. Neurobiologist Eric Kandel showed that every time you recall a memory, you're not just replaying it, you're rewriting it. Your memories are not archival footage. They're home movies edited by a drunk director with an agenda. So when you say, I know who I am, I have to ask, which version? The one shaped by your family, your school, your trauma, your Instagram algorithm? Scholars still debate whether there's a core self beneath all the noise, or whether identity is just a useful fiction, a sandbox avatar we animate while trying not to freak out about death. But here's what's certain. The moment you think you've found yourself, you stop looking. You fossilize. You start defending the mask instead of evolving the soul beneath it. So maybe the better question isn't who am I? Maybe it's what am I defending? Or whose voice is speaking when I say this is me? Because the more you dig, the more you realize. The true self isn't something you find, it's something you uncover. And that's a terrifying excavation most people never begin. You probably think you're a good person, not perfect, but decent. You recycle, you tip, you let people merge in traffic, even when it burns your soul. And maybe, just maybe, you believe your sense of right and wrong comes from some inner moral compass, some deep, innate knowing of what is fair, just, kind, and true. Let's demolish that fantasy, because your morality, it's not yours. Not really, it's inherited, installed, and in many cases manipulated. From the moment you were able to walk, you were already being trained. Be a good boy. Don't hit your sister. Say sorry. Don't talk back. You weren't learning ethics, you were learning compliance. Morality began as the behavior that made adults like you, that made society accept you, that made God not punish you, or so you were told. And then came the stories, fairy tales, cartoons, Bible verses, Instagram posts, all teaching you that kindness is good, selfishness is bad, lying is wrong, and courage will be rewarded. But what happens when the rules contradict each other? Is it moral to lie if it saves someone's life? Is it wrong to steal if your children are starving? Is violence ever ethical if it prevents greater harm? If you find those questions uncomfortable, congratulations, your morality is now under review. Friedrich Nietzsche would be smiling in the corner, sharpening his philosophical blade. He believed that most people live under a system of slave morality, a set of values built around weakness, fear, and obedience. According to him, our cultural emphasis on humility, meekness, and compassion didn't arise from divine truth. It came from the oppressed trying to protect themselves from the powerful. Nietzsche contrasted this with master morality, a system rooted in strength, assertiveness, pride, and self-definition. In this framework, good is what affirms life, what elevates the self, what expands power and vitality. Bad isn't evil, it's simply weakness, mediocrity, conformity. Let that sink in. The moral code you were taught might have been designed to keep you small, and it works. Most people don't do the right thing because it's right. They do it because they're afraid of punishment, judgment, rejection, or shame. Morality in practice is often just social anxiety with a halo. Let's bring in a mainstream psychological twist. In the famous Milgram experiment, regular people, just like you, were instructed to deliver what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. Many complied, even as the recipient screamed in agony. Why? Because authority told them to. Their moral instincts collapsed the moment they were told it was for the greater good. You like to think you'd be the exception. You wouldn't have pushed the button. You would have stood up, rebelled, walked away. Sure. Now here's a quirky historical tidbit. In ancient Sparta, stealing was not considered wrong, as long as you didn't get caught. If you were caught, the punishment wasn't for the theft, it was for your incompetence. That was their moral code. Efficiency over honesty, strength over virtue. Which leads us to an uncomfortable realization. Morality is not absolute, it's contextual, fluid, built and rebuilt by tribes, empires, religions, corporations. What is evil in one culture is sacred in another. What is honorable in one century is horrific in the next, and vice versa. Philosophers still argue whether there is such a thing as objective morality. Is there a true right and wrong written into the fabric of the universe? Or is morality just an evolved survival strategy, a way to keep tribes cohesive and cooperative long enough to outlast their neighbors? And then there's the personal layer. You might follow the rules publicly, but secretly break them when convenient. Or you justify your moral failures by casting yourself as the victim. I cheated, but I was being neglected. I lied, but it was to protect someone. We're not moral creatures. We're moral storytellers. We bend ethics to fit the narrative where we're still the hero. So if your morality was installed by others, if it shifts across time and culture, if it collapses under authority, and if you constantly rewrite it to fit your actions, then what exactly are you defending when you say, I'm a good person? Because maybe you're not good. Maybe you're just compliant. And that, my friend, is a terrifying kind of evil all on its own. You say you love them, that they're your soulmate, that you couldn't live without them. You smile when you text them, you replay voice notes, you count the minutes till they reply. You say, I've never felt like this before. But here's the whisper behind the curtain. Is it really love, or are you just seeing yourself in disguise? Love, especially romantic love, is perhaps the most intoxicating illusion humans ever created. It feels cosmic, destined, sacred. But more often than not, it's projection, a mirror trick. You don't fall in love with them. You fall in love with the part of you that feels seen, soothed, or desired when they're around. Carl Jung warned about this in his writings on the anima and animus, the unconscious feminine and masculine energies within us. When you fall for someone, you're often not seeing them clearly. You're seeing the part of you that longs to be completed. The man who falls head over heels for the mysterious, artistic girl may just be craving emotional depth he's never allowed himself. The woman who chases the stoic, powerful man may be yearning for inner strength she's never claimed. Love becomes a game of emotional puppets. You dance with your unmet needs, unresolved wounds, childhood longings, dressed in someone else's clothes. Here's a mainstream psychological truth. Attachment theory shows us that our adult relationships are shaped by the way we bonded or failed to bond with caregivers as children. Anxious, avoidant, secure. You may think you're choosing partners based on compatibility, but really you're reenacting your earliest emotional dynamics, hoping this time the ending will be different, and it gets darker. You might think jealousy is proof of love. That longing is romantic, that obsession is passion, but those might just be abandonment wounds disguised as desire. You don't want them, you want to heal through them. You want the fantasy that this person will finally give you the love your inner child never received. Let's get weird. In medieval times, romantic love was considered a kind of divine madness. Courtly love especially was all about not being with the person you adored. Knights worshipped unattainable ladies. The suffering was the point. The ache made it holy. If they actually got together, the spell broke. It's like love only works when it's slightly out of reach. And that brings us to a brutal realization. Love, in its popular form, is often codependency with better lighting. You crave what soothes your insecurity. You ignore what triggers your shadow. You say it's meant to be, but deep down, you pick them because they scratch a wound you never healed. That hot and cold guy who keeps you guessing might remind you of a distant parent whose attention you chased. That girl who constantly needs validation might echo a mother you had to rescue emotionally. And when things go wrong, as they often do, you don't walk away. You double down, because walking away means confronting the fact that love didn't save you. Again, psychologists still debate what real love is. Is it a biological drive like hunger? Is real love an emotional state, a social construct, or a spiritual truth? Some say it's oxytocin and dopamine. Others say it's a mirror for our evolution. Some call it sacred, others strategic. The only consistent thing about love is how wildly inconsistent it is. And yet you chase it. You swipe, you text, you ache, you mistake intensity for intimacy. You confuse compatibility with chemistry. You fall for people who match your trauma, not your dreams. And you tell yourself this time is different. But until you unlearn the fantasy, it never is. So what if real love isn't fireworks or fate? What if it's seeing another person clearly, without needing them to fix you? What if it's boring sometimes, quiet, hard? What if it's about choosing someone after the projection fades? Because until then, what you're calling love might just be an echo of your own unfinished story, bouncing off someone else's body. You're hurting. That much is clear. Sometimes it's a quiet ache, an invisible weight pressing on your chest as you scroll through highlight reels of other people's lives. Other times it's loud. Panic attacks at 2 a.m., fists clenched under the sheets, your mind racing through every decision you ever made. You call it anxiety, depression, burnout, loneliness. Sometimes you don't call it anything because naming it makes it too real. But underneath all those labels, there's one haunting question. How much of your suffering is self-inflicted? Before you get defensive, let's be clear. Pain is real. Trauma is real. Loss, grief, oppression, very real. But suffering? That's what happens when your mind won't stop chewing on the pain. When you cling to it, rehearse it, build shrines to it in your inner world. Arthur Schopenhauer believed suffering is the default human condition. Not because life is inherently cruel, but because desire is insatiable. The moment you get what you want something else. And when you don't get what you want, you suffer. Either way, desire owns you. You don't just want love, you want the right kind of love, at the right time, in the right aesthetic packaging. You don't just want success, you want admiration, legacy, and a splash of envy from your ex. You don't just want peace, you want it without boredom. You want it without facing your unresolved mess. And when reality doesn't match that fantasy, you suffer. Let's back that up with a mainstream psychological finding. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches that suffering is often created or amplified by distorted thinking. Catastrophizing, black and white thinking, personalizing. These are mental habits, not objective truths. You feel abandoned, not because someone left you, but because your brain interpreted silence as rejection. You feel worthless, not because you are, but because your inner critic's voice is louder than any compliment you receive. And then comes the self-sabotage. You overthink until the opportunity disappears. You push people away before they can hurt you. You procrastinate until failure feels inevitable. And then you mourn it, as if life betrayed you, instead of admitting you were afraid to show up. Want a quirky tidbit? In ancient Greece, there was a word for the self-destructive force inside all of us. Ate. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a goddess who clouded your mind with madness, pride, and impulsive decisions. Heroes would destroy themselves not from weakness, but from refusing to listen to their wiser instincts. And that's the paradox of modern suffering. So much of it comes from what you won't let yourself feel. You stuff anger because good people don't get mad. You numb grief because life goes on. You suppress shame by pretending it doesn't exist. But unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It festers, it leaks, it turns inward, it becomes insomnia, digestive issues, chronic tension, relationship sabotage. Psychologists still debate whether emotional suppression causes physical illness. But there's growing evidence. Trauma stored in the body manifests as pain. Your body keeps the score, even when your mind refuses to read it. So what do? You start by owning it, not blaming yourself, but owning your participation, your unconscious agreements, your refusal to set boundaries, your choice to stay silent when you should have screamed, your need to be liked more than your need to be well. Schopenhauer said the only escape from suffering is through negation of the will, detaching from desire itself. But maybe the first step is gentler, recognizing the suffering that's optional. The pain you add on top of pain, the illusion that says, I deserve this, or this is just who I am, because maybe you don't. Maybe if you peeled back the layers, if you grieved honestly, felt fully, expressed fiercely, you'd find a different version of yourself beneath the suffering. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but free. You wake up, check your phone, reply to some texts, doom scroll for a bit, then drag yourself into a job you're not even sure you chose. You buy things you don't need, laugh at jokes you don't find funny, Say I'm fine when you're not, and convince yourself that someday, you'll finally feel successful. But let's call it what it is. You're inside a giant illusion, and that illusion is called society. You think it's normal because everyone's doing it, but conformity doesn't make it true. It just makes it louder. From birth, you've been wrapped in stories about what life should be. Go to school, get a degree, get a job, find someone attractive enough to show off, but not so ambitious that they intimidate you. Have kids, buy a house you can't afford, work till you're too tired to care. Then maybe, if you're lucky, retire with enough money to finally breathe, but not enough energy left to run. Congratulations, you followed the script. But who wrote it? Let's trace it back. The Industrial Revolution gave us the modern work week, not biology, not God, not some ancient wisdom scroll, just factories that needed humans to mimic machines. Bell schedules, cubicles, performance reviews, they weren't designed for joy or meaning, they were designed for efficiency. And guess what? You internalized it. Now you measure your worth by productivity. You apologize for resting. You feel guilty for doing nothing. Somewhere along the line, capitalism sold you the idea that time is money, and you bought it with your soul. Mainstream fact time. In 1955, British economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that by the 21st century, technological advances would reduce the work week to 15 hours. He believed abundance would free us. But instead of choosing leisure, we chose consumption. We didn't become happier, we became busier. And this busyness, it's a trap. The more you chase, the more the goalpost moves. You reach one milestone and suddenly there's another. A better body, a cleaner kitchen, a shinier partner, a sexier side hustle. Society never lets you feel done because dissatisfaction drives the economy. Now here's a weird historical tidbit. In medieval Europe, peasants worked fewer hours annually than the average modern office worker. Yes, they died earlier and had fewer creature comforts, but they had more feast days, naps, and social rituals. You, meanwhile, check Slack during dinner and call it balance. Niccolo Machiavelli knew the game well. He wrote that society needs illusions to function, that leaders must manipulate appearances to keep order, that the masses prefer comfort over truth. The greater good, he warned, is often just code for keep the machine running. And what about religion, politics, and tradition? Often used not to elevate consciousness, but to control it, to make people afraid of their own desires, to teach obedience as virtue, to sell shame disguised as righteousness. Scholars still argue whether society shapes the individual or if individuals shape society. But when you look around at social media filters, resume inflation, spiritual bypassing, hustle culture, and fake humility, you start to see most people aren't expressing who they are. They're performing who they think they need to be accepted. You laugh at reality shows and roll your eyes at influencer culture, but deep down, you're in your own episode. Editing yourself, playing the role, hoping for likes, real or imagined. And what if you stopped? What if you ignored the algorithm, turned off the script, walked off the stage? Terrifying, isn't it? Because society doesn't just shape your behavior, it shapes your identity. When you step outside its rules, you risk losing your place, your tribe, your sense of self. Rejection used to mean death. Now it just means awkward silence at parties and existential dread in the car. But here's the truth. The cage only holds you if you believe it's real. You weren't born to be a product. You weren't designed to fit a demographic. You are not your follower count, your job title, your curated opinions. Beneath all of that is a feral, radiant, untamed self gasping for air under the weight of all the shoulds. So the next time you feel like you don't belong, good. Maybe you're finally waking up. You've been told that success is the ultimate goal, that it's the destination. Once you reach it, everything else, your anxiety, loneliness, sense of meaninglessness, will finally dissolve like fog in the morning sun. But here's the twist. Success might be your downfall. The climb looks noble. hustle, grind, sacrifice, get the bag, buy the house, build the brand, be your own boss. All that glorious ambition poured into the altar of making it. And when you get there, when you taste the money, the praise, the status, you think the ache inside you will quiet. Spoiler, it won't. Because success, when pursued without self-awareness, doesn't cure your suffering, it just changes its flavor. Let's consult our good friend Niccolo Machiavelli again. He warned that power brings danger, not peace. To rise in influence is to become a target. Once you gain control, paranoia sets in. You start looking over your shoulder. You stop trusting people. And now the empire you built becomes your cage. Mainstream psychology echoes this too. A study by the University of Rochester found that people who chased extrinsic goals, money, fame, image, reported lower well-being, even after achieving those goals. Meanwhile, those who chased intrinsic goals, growth, connection, purpose, were happier, even with less material success. So yeah, get rich, just don't expect it to save your soul. Let's make it weird with a historical tidbit. Roman generals returning home in triumph were paraded through the streets like gods, but behind them stood a servant whispering, "Memento mori." Remember, you are mortal. A reality check in the midst of glory. But of course you forget, we all do. You believe the title will fix your childhood wound, that the partner will fix your shame, that the TED Talk or the Grammy or the six-figure deal will finally quiet the voice that says you're not enough. But it doesn't. Because external success cannot rewrite internal scripts. Arthur Schopenhauer might chime in here and say, every fulfilled desire creates a vacuum. As soon as one craving is satisfied, another appears. He called this the pendulum of existence. You swing between longing and boredom, chasing meaning that always moves just out of reach. Even the greats weren't spared. Ernest Hemingway won the Nobel Prize and still ended his life in despair. Robin Williams made millions laugh but battled unbearable depression. Anthony Bourdain had our dream job, travel, food, freedom, and still found himself unable to stay. Because success doesn't silence the shadow, sometimes it feeds it. You get the car, but now you fear someone will scratch it. You get the role, but now you feel like a fraud. You get the girl, the guy, the house, the followers, and then you wait for the other shoe to drop. Psychologists still argue whether the pursuit of success is inherently toxic, or if it simply amplifies what's already inside you. If you climb empty, you arrive emptier. If you climb whole, you may find success is just quieter than expected. And let's not forget, success breeds expectation. You were funny once, now you have to be funny forever. You wrote a bestseller, now what? You went viral, now you can't afford to flop. The applause becomes a drug, and your sense of worth becomes a hostage to public opinion. That's not freedom, that's a gilded cage. So what now? Give it all up, run to the forest? Maybe. Or maybe redefine what success means. Maybe let it be aligned, not just admired. Maybe let it be quiet, private, soulful. Maybe success is showing up fully for your own life, even when no one's clapping. Because if you chase success without asking why, you risk becoming the villain in your own story, and no amount of trophies can fix that. You want to be happy. Of course you do. It's the one goal that slips through almost every sentence, every decision, every impulse. You say, I just want to be happy, and no one questions it, because we've all swallowed the same lie, that happiness is the point. But what if it isn't? What if your obsession with happiness is the very thing making you miserable? Let's get this out of the way. Happiness isn't bad. It's just misunderstood. You think of it like a destination, a golden plateau where suffering stops, anxiety dissolves, and you walk around glowing like a human version of a cozy blanket ad. But happiness is fleeting. Chemically, it's a cocktail of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins, and those don't stay in your system longer than a few hours. You eat chocolate, you feel good, you win a game, you celebrate, you kiss someone you like, you float. But then it fades, because that's what chemicals do. They spike, they drop, and then you crave the next hit. Modern culture knows this and exploits it. Every app, product, brand, and algorithm is designed to trigger dopamine. Your feed is optimized not for truth or meaning or wisdom, but for pleasure. For that next little jolt of and when it fades, you scroll again, shop again, swipe again. Congratulations, you've been turned into a happiness addict. Here's a mainstream psychological fact. Studies show that the more we pursue happiness as a goal, the more it slips through our fingers. People who value happiness above all else often report lower well-being. Why? Because they set unrealistic expectations, and when life doesn't deliver constant joy, they feel like failures. In other words, chasing happiness makes you sad. Albert Camus, the French absurdist, saw right through this. He argued that life has no inherent meaning, and our desperate attempts to make it feel happy or purposeful are, at best, absurd. But instead of despairing, he proposed rebellion. Not against life itself, but against the illusion that it must make you feel good. He said the point isn't to be happy, it's to live, fully, consciously, to walk through life wide awake, even when it's bleak, even when it hurts, even when joy is nowhere to be found. Because real meaning, it lives deeper than happiness. Let's bring in a quirky historical tidbit. In ancient China, poets spoke more often of melancholy than joy. It was considered a noble emotional state, a sign of sensitivity, depth, reflection. Happiness was seen as shallow, fleeting, almost foolish. And what about our friend Carl Jung? He didn't believe in chasing happiness. He believed in wholeness, which includes sadness, grief, rage, confusion. To be whole is to feel everything, not just the shiny parts. Happiness, in his view, wasn't a goal. It was a byproduct of integration. So what happens when you stop chasing happiness? You feel other things, boredom, stillness, longing, but you also start noticing beauty, slowness, presence. You stop needing every moment to entertain you. You start participating in life, instead of consuming it like a product that's supposed to deliver joy on command. Scholars still debate what happiness even means. Is it pleasure, fulfillment, absence of suffering, alignment with purpose? The definition shifts across time, culture, and personality. What's joyful to one person is torture to another. One man's bliss is another man's existential crisis, and that's the point. There is no universal happiness. Just moments, glimpses, flashbulbs. You get a taste, then it's gone. And that's not a bug, that's the design. The problem is when you try to trap it, when you turn happiness into a performance, when you feel ashamed for not feeling good all the time. That shame, it's the real thief. So maybe happiness isn't a destination. Maybe it's a side effect of living honestly. Maybe it's not something you chase, but something that visits when you're too busy being real to notice. Because if you build your life around being happy, you might just miss the point of being alive. You live like you've got time, like there's always next year, like death is something that happens to other people, older people, sicker people, people who don't eat kale. But let's not kid ourselves. Death is closer than you think. Every day you walk past the ticking clock. You scroll while it ticks. You argue while it ticks. You hesitate, procrastinate, pretend you're immortal, while that quiet little metronome inside your cells keeps marching toward silence. You don't want to think about it. No one does. So you fill your days with noise, plans, goals, content, caffeine. You attach yourself to relationships, careers, identities, all of which are temporary, all of which vanish. You build routines as if they will protect you from the great unraveling. But deep down, you know the truth. Your body is a slow funeral. Cells are dying as you read this. Your brain is aging. Your bones are quietly losing density. Your memories are degrading, one by one. And every breath you take is a loan from a system that will eventually call it back. Let's go deeper. Martin Heidegger, the brooding German philosopher, coined the term being toward death. He argued that most people live inauthentically because they avoid confronting their mortality. They get lost in the they, societal expectations, routines, roles. But true authenticity only comes when you face your death, not in panic, but in awareness, in courage, in presence. Once you know you're going to die, you stop pretending your time is disposable. And yet we bury death beneath rituals. Hospitals sanitize it, obituaries euphemize it. We say passed away instead of died. We cover corpses in makeup. We scroll past headlines of mass death as if it's just background noise. But death doesn't care if you're ready. It doesn't care how busy you are. It doesn't care if you just bought new furniture. Want a mainstream statistic that'll jolt you? The average adult has about 4,000 weeks to live. That's it. If you're 30, you've already spent around 1,600 of them. You probably don't even remember half. How many did you truly live? Now here's a quirky historical tidbit. The ancient Stoics practiced memento mori, reminders of death. They kept skulls on their desks, wrote death poems, meditated on their last breath. Not to be morbid, but to stay awake, to live deliberately. Seneca, in one of his letters, wrote, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." Translation, you panic about little things, yet waste your life on nothing. And what about religion? Across traditions, death is both a threat and a promise. In Christianity, it leads to judgment. In Buddhism, to rebirth. In Islam, to reckoning. In Hinduism, to liberation or reincarnation, depending on your karma score. But outside of belief systems, there's just mystery. Psychologists still argue what a good death looks like. Peaceful, meaningful, in your sleep, surrounded by loved ones. Some say it's about legacy. Others say it's about presence in the final moments. But most agree, people who confront mortality earlier tend to live more fulfilling lives. Because when you remember you'll die, you stop chasing perfection. You say the thing, you walk away, you choose what actually matters, you let go of needing every moment to be productive. And yes, it's scary, of course it is, but that fear is also a gift. It means you're awake, it means you care, it means you're still here. So take a breath, not for comfort, but for clarity, because you don't have forever, you have this. You wake up in the morning and the day already has a plan for you. There's a job to do, bills to pay, people to please, metrics to hit. You brush your teeth with the same hand, drive the same route, smile at the same neighbors, and reply, "Not bad, you," to the same question. But at some point, the question creeps in. Whose life is this? It's a terrifying question because it hints at a deeper horror that maybe, just maybe, you've been living someone else's life all along. Let's start with the basics. You didn't choose your name. You didn't choose your language, your accent, your culture, your family, your socioeconomic class, your religion, your neighborhood, your initial ideas about what's normal. Before you were even conscious, you were being programmed. By parents, teachers, media, pastors, influencers, corporations, everyone had a hand in shaping the story you think is yours. But stories can be cages too. Psychologist Jonas Webb talks about childhood emotional neglect, the subtle, invisible kind of trauma where your emotions weren't acknowledged, mirrored, or validated. Not abuse, not violence, just absence. And out of that absence, children adapt. They become what their caregivers need them to be. The pleaser, the achiever, the funny one, the invisible one, and the tragic part, those adaptations often become your identity. You say, "This is just who I am," but maybe it's just who you had to be. Let's look at a mainstream phenomenon, parental projection. This is when parents, consciously or not, force their unlived dreams onto their children. Mom didn't become a dancer, you're in ballet. Dad never made varsity, guess who's getting private coaching? And then, as an adult, you find yourself working a job you hate, chasing goals that exhaust you, and wondering why you feel hollow, even when you're winning. Because success in someone else's story still feels like failure in your own, and it gets worse. Society rewards the script followers. You get applause for being productive, for climbing ladders, for fitting in. You get likes for parroting safe opinions. You get raises for staying in line. And the more you conform, the more praise you receive. Eventually, it becomes harder and harder to tell where your authentic self ends and the performance begins. Here's a quirky cultural tidbit. In Japan, there's a term called giri, duty, obligation to family, society, tradition. Many people live their entire lives according to giri, sacrificing personal desires for communal harmony. Sound familiar? It's not questioned, it's noble, but it's also suffocating, a silent epidemic of people living lives that aren't theirs, out of duty. And what about capitalism? The system doesn't just sell you products, it sells you identities. Want to feel edgy? Buy this leather jacket. Want to feel spiritual? Here's your Sage bundle and $80 yoga mat. Want to feel successful? Get the car, the house, the wristwatch. It's all prepackaged meaning, a rented self. Psychologists still argue whether there is such a thing as an authentic self, or if we're just a mosaic of influences and reactions. But even if the self is built, not born, shouldn't you be the one doing the building? So what's the way out? Start by noticing the opinions that feel inherited, the goals that no longer excite you, the relationships that drain instead of nourish, the habits that keep you numb. And then ask the hardest question of all: if no one expected anything from me, what would I choose? You might not know the answer yet. That's okay. The truth doesn't always arrive fully formed. Sometimes it starts as a whisper, a flicker, a quiet rebellion. And no, you don't have to blow up your life tomorrow. You don't need to quit your job, dye your hair blue, and move to a monastery. But you do need to start choosing. Deliberately, consciously. Because every time you don't, you're rehearsing a life that isn't yours. And someday, you'll wake up and it'll be too late to rewrite the script. So stop waiting for permission. No one's going to hand you your life back. You have to take it. You might believe you're different. If power came your way, you'd use it responsibly, generously, fairly, humbly. Picture yourself as the good king, ethical CEO, benevolent influencer, kind boss, a leader who keeps power from corrupting you. Sure. Now let's be honest, power always corrupts, even you. Not immediately, not obviously. It starts as confidence, then preference, then entitlement, then control. And before you know it, you're not leading, you're owning. Not guiding, you're manipulating. And the worst part, you still believe you're the good guy. Let's visit Lord Acton's famous warning. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This wasn't hyperbole. He was observing how quickly even decent people begin to rot when no one tells them no. Why? Because power insulates you from consequences, from feedback, from reality. When you gain status, people stop telling you the truth. They laugh at your bad jokes. They agree with your half-baked ideas. They say yes when they mean hell no. And if you're not grounded, you start believing you're special. You're not. Mainstream psychology backs this up. The power paradox, coined by Dr. Keltner, shows that while people often rise to power because of empathy and collaboration, once they gain that power, they become less empathetic, less self-aware, more impulsive, more entitled. It's not a character flaw, it's a human pattern. Want a quirky example? Studies show that people driving luxury cars are more likely to cut others off, fail to yield to pedestrians, and ignore traffic laws. Something about sitting in that $80,000 status symbol makes the brain go, I'm more important than the rules. And don't think this only applies to presidents or billionaires. Power is relative. You can abuse it as a teacher, as a parent, as a romantic partner, as someone with more followers, more charm, more money, more anything. Because the moment you have more control than someone else, the temptation is there to take advantage, to shape the narrative, to get your way, and to justify it with phrases like, I'm just being efficient, or they need my leadership, or if I don't, someone else will. Machiavelli knew this well. He didn't glamorize cruelty, he simply observed it. Power, he argued, doesn't reward goodness, it rewards strategy. The prince who clings to virtue loses his kingdom. The one who learns when to be a lion and when to be a fox, he survives. But here's the scary part. Corruption doesn't feel evil when you're the one doing it. It feels earned. You call it confidence, clarity, boundaries, success. You weaponize righteousness. You conflate domination with leadership. You start to believe your own press, and before you realize it, you've become the person you once swore to resist. Psychologists still debate whether power reveals your true self or simply exaggerates whatever's already there. Is the tyrant born or made? The answer might be both, but what's undeniable is this: power doesn't just test your integrity, it erodes it. Unless you fight back. That means surrounding yourself with people who challenge you. It means seeking criticism on purpose. It means holding yourself to higher standards than the world does. It means remembering every damn day that leadership is service, not supremacy. Because if you're not vigilant, power won't just corrupt you, it'll blind you. You'll lose the very empathy that got you to the top. You'll see people as tools. You'll think your success makes you smarter, wiser, morally superior, and it doesn't. So the next time you rise, whether it's in your career, your relationship, your social circle, pause, breathe, ask yourself, am I leading or am I feeding? Because power doesn't just test who you are, it reveals who you're willing to become when no one stops you. You're healing, or so you tell yourself. You've read the books, gone to therapy, posted the quotes, set boundaries, lit the candles, burned the sage. You're reclaiming your inner child, reparenting your wounded self, learning how to say no and I deserve better. But then one morning, you wake up hollow, detached, unrecognizable. The things that used to feel like you don't anymore. Your favorite song sounds like a stranger, your hobbies bore you, your ambitions dissolve. Because no one warned you, healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. Healing means destroying who you were. And that's terrifying. The popular image of healing is soft, baths, breathwork, warm drinks, gentle words. But real healing, it's brutal. It cracks you open. It confronts your delusions. It tears away the false self you built to survive. Because that self, your coping mechanisms, your people-pleasing, your ambition, your apathy, your perfectionism wasn't just a personality. It was armor. It was strategy. It was survival. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Healing makes the unconscious conscious. And it doesn't arrive with flowers. It arrives with rage, with grief, with terrifying clarity. You'll realize you never really loved them, you needed them, that your dream job was actually a trauma response, that your self-worth was built entirely on being needed, useful, agreeable, hot, clever, anything but yourself. Let's bring in a mainstream concept, post-traumatic growth. Psychologists use it to describe how after a major crisis, people don't just bounce back, they change fundamentally. Their values shift, their identity deepens. But the process is not graceful. It often involves disorientation, existential depression, and profound loneliness. Because to grow, something has to die. And often what dies is the version of you that everyone liked, the version that fit, the version that didn't make waves. Here's a quirky tidbit. In ancient initiation rituals, whether among the Greeks, the Celts, or many indigenous tribes, the initiate was symbolically killed, buried, left alone, marked. The message was clear: to step into your true self, the old self must be sacrificed. You don't go back to normal, you become someone else. And that's where most people get stuck. They want the healing without the death. They want to feel better without changing. They want to be happy without leaving behind the identity that's killing them. But healing isn't about comfort, it's about truth. And truth, as you've learned by now, hurts. Psychologists still debate whether identity is fixed or fluid. Some argue that you're a single self evolving over time. Others say you're a collection of roles, masks, responses. But healing doesn't care what the theory says. It burns away whatever is false. And that's where the real crisis begins. You start mourning people who are still alive because you've changed and they haven't. You feel distant from your old life because you no longer recognize it. You feel lonely because healing is a solo path. And you doubt yourself constantly because society rewards consistency, not transformation. But here's the secret. You're not broken. You're breaking open. And that's exactly what healing looks like. Not a polished version of your old self, but a raw, new self that's still growing roots. Still learning to speak, still forming shape, still afraid but free. So if you feel lost, disconnected, unsure of who you are, good. It means the old you is gone, and the real you is finally on the way. You've searched for meaning in all the usual places. Religion, relationships, career, community, even the comment section of a podcast you half liked but didn't finish. You've read books that promised purpose, followed influencers who spoke in pastel affirmations, and whispered prayers into the ceiling fan at 3 a.m. Still, there's a void, because you've been trained to find meaning, like it's a hidden treasure buried under the right job, the right person, the right lifestyle. But the brutal, liberating truth? Meaning isn't found, it's made. You don't stumble upon it while journaling in Bali. You don't earn it with good behavior. You don't unlock it with enough vision boards. Meaning isn't a prize, it's a practice. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist who chain-smoked through the 20th century, argued that life has no inherent meaning, no divine blueprint, no cosmic purpose. And that's not a tragedy, it's freedom. Because if there's no fixed meaning, then you get to create it every day, through your choices, your values, your actions. But that kind of freedom, it's terrifying. It means you can't blame the universe for your emptiness. You can't say, I'm waiting for a sign, because the sign is you. The meaning must come from you, and if you don't choose it, you drift. Let's ground this in mainstream psychology. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most profound books ever penned. He observed that even in the most inhumane conditions, those who survived weren't the strongest or the smartest, but those who had a why, not a cosmic truth, just a reason to keep going. For some, it was love. For others, unfinished work. For others, still a sense of responsibility. Frankl believed that suffering, when connected to meaning, becomes bearable, even beautiful. That we don't need a painless life, we need a purposeful one. Now, for something quirky, in ancient Norse mythology, even the gods knew they would one day die. Ragnarok wasn't a maybe, it was a certainty. But the gods still fought. They still lived with courage and dignity, not because they would win, but because meaning didn't require victory. Just action, and that's the key. Meaning is made through movement. You build it by showing up, by creating, by helping, by learning, by loving. Not in grand, performative ways, but in quiet, private acts that no algorithm will ever reward. You don't need to change the world. That's ego dressed as virtue. You just need to change your world, the one you can touch, influence, shape. You can raise a child with gentleness, build a table, grow a garden, write a sentence that helps someone feel less alone. That's meaning. That's real. Philosophers still argue whether meaning is subjective, intersubjective, or objective, whether it's personal, collective, or cosmic. But maybe the answer doesn't matter. Maybe meaning doesn't exist until you give it a name, a shape, a heartbeat. So what if you stopped searching for the right purpose and started choosing a worthy one? What if you made peace with not knowing what it all means and still decided to love deeply, speak truth, walk bravely? Because that's the real rebellion, to create meaning in a world that doesn't hand it to you. To wake up each day and say, I will live with intention, even if no one watches, even if it doesn't last, even if it ends tomorrow. Because maybe the point of life is that you get to decide the point. And no one, not your parents, your pastor, your boss, or your algorithm can do it for you. So now you float, a little lighter, a little heavier, depending on which truth hit hardest. Your idea of reality has been cracked, your unconscious made visible, your freedom exposed as a cage, your morality unmasked, your relationships reframed, your suffering questioned, your death acknowledged, and your identity undone. But take a deep breath. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing what comes next. Let the noise settle. Let the tension soften. Let the images fade, not into oblivion, but into compost, fertile ground for whatever version of you is quietly blooming beneath the wreckage. You don't need to fix everything tonight. You don't need to rush toward clarity. Let the uncertainty sit beside you like an old friend. Let your thoughts drift like leaves in a stream. Let your heartbeat remind you that you're alive, and that alone is a miracle. No need to rush back into the performance. For now, you can just be, not perfect, not healed, not enlightened, just awake, just aware, just you. So pull the covers up, let the hum of your world slow to a whisper. The iceberg has surfaced, you survived, and now you begin again.